Aloha, y'all. So I found out yesterday, if you say y'all, it means 5 people or less. If there's more than 5 people, you say all y'all. So I'm still working on my Southern hospitality, excuse me. We are in John chapter 7. I had the privilege yesterday of working at a homeless, called the Lord's Kitchen, a homeless breakfast they do once a month. And I got to meet some wonderful people. They allowed me to serve the drink. They had milk and coffee and a tropical mixed drink. And so you hear all these different stories and you meet some wonderful characters. I met the guy that's running for president. I met him. I met a guy when I brought the tropical drink. He said, "Do you have any vodka for that?" And so the rumor's getting out that our church meets at a bar, so now they want the pastor to serve them drinks. I met some other issues that I won't go into today, but what a reminder of, this happened to be a church that does this once a month. They trade churches to do it. But as you're ministering there are different worlds that people live in. Some are tragically very unsettled and mental difficulties, and we've talked about that recently in our own church. But we have opportunities that open up. And I think to myself, when I'm looking at this chapter 7, we're going to look at 13 verses that move rather quickly. But when you think of the opportunities that open up, you will see Jesus with his own family and the counter reaction to his ministry. Some people are at that breakfast yesterday were very thankful. We appreciate this. This is so nice that you do. Others, they were in a little different world. And I thought that's really what Jesus was dealing with all the time. Some said thank you, some rejected, some argued, some were not stable, and yet Jesus still ministers. Drop down with me right into verse 1 after we spent 4 weeks in chapter 6. Watch how chapter 7 opens. After these things, let's just call that chapter 6. After these things, Jesus walked in Galilee. Galilee, Capernaum, it was his home area for most of his ministry. And he did not want to walk in Judea because the Jews sought to kill him. Remember, quite often as this term, the Jews, is used, it's not all of the Jews, but it's the Jewish leaders. It's the Jewish religious leaders. So he wisely, not because he was afraid, but as you'll see, it wasn't his time, he wisely stays in Galilee. And that brings a conversation about, as he is seeking God's timing, the Father's timing, for his ministry and his direction. He knew the Jews wanted to kill him, but Jesus doesn't die because someone kills him. He lays his life down. And there's a perfect timing of God for that, and he knew the timing. So now the Jews, in verse 2, they had the Feast of the Tabernacles at hand. That's that beautiful remembrance, also called the Feast of the Booths. And they would set up little portable framed, almost like what we'd call tents, and cover them to remind them of how God took care of them in the wilderness. Then that was one of the 3 major celebrations and feasts that would take place. That was going on. So as that was going on, everyone migrates and goes to Judea, and they leave Galilee. And so that is taking place at this time. And his brothers, and this is his biological brothers, we would call them half-brothers. Jesus had brothers. Matthew tells us he had sister. And so they are in this group and grew up with Jesus, hear his claims of being the Messiah, but you can tell by this interaction that they didn't believe. As a matter of fact, they don't believe until he finally dies and the resurrection takes place. It says his brothers, and this sounds like brothers, for they speak, and they said to him, "Why don't you depart from here and go into Judea, that your disciples also may see the works that you are doing." If you wanted to paraphrase that from a brother's point of view, hey, big shot, you do it up here in the sleepy little Galilee area, and you do your tricks and your shows. Why don't you go down to where the big boys hang? Judea, Jerusalem. And why don't you proclaim and do your stuff there? Do you hear the sarcasm?
Yeah.
You hear the little brothers to the big brother, the half brother. They were not convinced. They didn't truly believe. For one, they continue, verse 4, one does anything in secret while he himself, for one does anything in secret while he himself seeks to be known openly. If you do these things, show yourself to the world. For even his brothers, John's commentary says, did not believe in him. You go do it then, Jesus. Go ahead, big time. Go to Jerusalem where the religious leaders are in abundance. And you do the same thing that you're doing here. Here's Jesus' response to his siblings. Jesus said to them, verse 6, my time has not yet come, but your time is always ready. The timing from the crowd, the timing from his brother was, hey, we want you to be the Messiah in a political sense. Hey, we want you to work with our timing. Hey, we want you to do what we say. Take a little honest quiz before me right now, will you? That's how we treat God sometimes. I'll believe in you if you work on my timing. I'll believe in you if you do what I request. And Jesus is not swayed by it. He knew full well that God had his perfect timing even for the cross, and the Father would send him there. But they had their timing, and Jesus would hear his timing and follow his timing from the Father. He said to them, my time has not yet come, but your time is always ready. You follow the world's timing, I follow my Father's timing. And so he continues by that description of the world. He says, the world cannot hate you, but it hates me, because I testify of it that the works are evil. Jesus brought truth. He said, this is an evil and perverse generation, and you must be saved from it. That's the same message today. I don't have to illustrate one thing before you today if I ask you to raise your hand and say, is this an evil and perverse generation? It is tumbling down. And Jesus calls us in his timing to wake up and to follow him closely to make sure we're secure in our salvation, because this time will not last. I have a perfect timing set by my Father, and the world is different to you. It likes you because you follow the world and its timing. It hates me because I expose the world and tell that the works are evil. This is a conversation with his brothers, remember? You go up to this feast. They just told him, why don't you go there? He said, you go up to this feast. I am not yet going up to the feast, for my time has not yet fully come. When he had said these things to them, he remained in Galilee. There would be a pilgrimage going to Jerusalem, but he remained. Notice the word, he said, not yet. He will go, and we're going to see it here in the next few verses, but not because of what the world tells him or his brothers tell him or the pressures of anything. He'll go in his timing to do God's mission. So there is the response. It says in verse 10, but when his brothers had gone up, then Jesus also went up to the feast, but not openly. In other words, secretly, it says, as it were, in secret. You don't pressure me on time. I don't go with the crowd. I know that the Jews are out to kill me. The sect of the religious leaders are out to kill me. That's not why I'm not going. I go in my time when God says now. And so they leave, and he goes up in secret. And notice in these last three verses of our study, in this brief overview here, notice in verse 11, then, so he's up there now, but not announced. He's in secret, as it were. Then the Jews sought him at the feast and said, where is he? The crowds have come from Galilee. Where is this Jesus? Where is he? And there was much complaining. Here's a survey of the crowd, so to speak. There was much complaining among the people concerning Jesus. Some said, he is good. Others said, No, on the contrary, he deceives people. The Messiah has come. And much like today, some people say, yeah, pretty good teacher, pretty good guy. Heard he did some miracles, heard he fed some people. And yeah, he's a good guy. And others, the response was in the crowd, this is why you don't listen to the crowd for your faith in Jesus, you come to the Word of God. They said, no, he's a deceiver. He teaches falsely. And this is a false Christ. So in the crowd, as they're coming in one of the biggest festivals of the three, they come and the crowd, if it was surveyed, John gives us this overview, some think he's great. Some think he's good. And others say, no, he's just a deceiver. Just a deceiver. Interesting, if you survey people today, if they even know of Jesus, they'll have different opinions, mostly shaped by the by the world, unfamiliar with the word, and they will have different opinions. Jesus is a cool guy. Jesus is a cool dude. I grew up growing up near Burbank, in Burbank, Jesus is the great Dodger in the sky. You know, he's that guy. And so many different views, and yet in his perfect timing, he comes and he condemns the world in the sense of its evil and says, only I can save you. Only I can save you. Different opinions, they still abound today. Watch this 13th verse as we close. However, no one spoke openly of him for the fear of the Jews. In other words, it doesn't matter what your opinion is. If you share it, you're at risk by the government to be, and the religious leaders of that time. No one spoke their opinion because they were fearful of that governing body. And so often that is the case today. You can't talk about Jesus here. You can't talk about him on our campuses. You can't have the word. You can't have any of that. And though there may be a bunch of different opinions, maybe a one-on-one or maybe a small group will share their opinions, but you certainly can't do it openly. He is too controversial. He is too controversial. We're going to see where this takes off next week and read ahead in chapter 7. But understand the basics of what we just said. It doesn't matter if you're related to Jesus, a disciple of Jesus, a follower of Jesus. You were even in this situation quenched in your opinion. You couldn't speak about it, as is much the case today. But before God and before Jesus, it comes down a narrow funnel to say, regardless of what the world says, you have to make a decision. As you have heard, he's been presented as either a liar, a lunatic, or a Lord. And if these things aren't true, then he's a liar. If he thinks they're true and they're not true, he's a lunatic. But the Bible tells us he's the Lord of all, King of kings, and Lord of lords. As we close this morning, I think it's a wonderful, hopefully, salivating introduction to this chapter. Because as we saw in 6 chapters, these amazing claims who Jesus said he is, the bread of life, the Father and I are one, God himself, he bases that foundation now, stands on it, and proclaims how we are to be saved, regardless of what the world thinks. So read ahead, but before you leave today, you should answer that question. Is this just crazy talk in the Bible? Is this just lunacy? Is it filled with lies, like some said, deceiving? Or is he Lord? If he's Lord, it changes everything. And the Bible tells us, yes, he is. Would you bow with me? I don't know that you can read a passage like this as you're bowing your heads and not respond. Again, opinions abound everywhere. Even in our families, they abound everywhere. Even in Jesus' family, they abound everywhere. And his brothers did not believe. But some did, and some had crazy ideas. Jesus doesn't take temperature test and say, hey church, what's it like down there right now? Anyone believe me? He says, who do you say that I am? Are you a believer in me? Would you surrender your life to me? Would you put your faith and trust completely in me, regardless of what the world does? The great invitation of the gospel is that if you've never done that, Jesus says, forget about the world that's falling apart. Forget about the world with all its perverse nature. I'll judge the world later, but right now the gospel says, if you've never received me, you can do that by simply saying, yes, God, I believe you are Lord. I ask you to come into my life. Forgive my sins. I receive you as my Savior. That's the message of chapter 7's opening. If you've never done that and you need to do that today, I would implore you to do it right now. Before we wrap up the service, just invite Christ in your heart. Receive that forgiveness. Maybe you need to recommit to him. You get sucked into some of the perverse parts of this world. And you need to say, God, would you forgive me? I'm not right with you. I want to be right with you. Jesus, I want to be a follower of yours. As this world falls apart, I want to follow you. You can make that prayer right now as well. And Father, as we bow before you, regardless of where we're at, you constantly invite this new commitment, recommitment, and connection with you. We believe what your word says. You are God, you are Lord, and you desire us to be with you. So for those who might be receiving you right now, I pray that you would secure that. For those recommitting, remind them that they are your child by the grace and mercy of Jesus. And as a result of it all, God, may we come back to you in a new faith this week, walking strong, completely secure that you are Lord indeed. He is Lord. He is Lord. He has risen from the dead, and he is Lord. Every knee shall bow, every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is